It was a cold December night, one that seemed no different from any other. My name is Sophia, and back then I was like any other teenager, glued to my phone, endlessly scrolling through TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. The hours would vanish, and I wouldn't even notice. I was trapped in a cycle of constant updates, meaningless videos, and a void I couldn't seem to fill. But little did I know that ordinary night would change everything I believed in forever. I was lying on the couch in our living room, the soft glow of my phone lighting up the otherwise dark room. My parents had long gone to bed, my siblings were in their rooms, and I was completely alone, lost in the endless digital world. That's when it happened. A strange dizziness overcame me. The room seemed to spin, my heart pounded, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my living room anymore. At first I didn't understand. I was floating, looking down at my own body, which lay motionless on the couch, phone still clutched in my hand. Panic gripped me. Was I dead? Was this a dream? I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The silence was overwhelming, and my heart filled with fear. Suddenly, a light appeared, a radiant, blinding light that cut through the darkness with a power I can't describe. It wasn't just a light, it was warmth, love, and authority all rolled into one. And then I saw him, Jesus. He didn't look like the paintings I had seen in church or the gentle figure in Sunday school stories. He was far more real, far more powerful. His presence radiated a love so overwhelming it brought me to tears. He extended his hand to me and spoke, "Come." His voice was calm, yet carried a weight that left no room for doubt. I reached out and took his hand, and in an instant, the scene shifted. We were no longer in my living room. Instead, we stood in a strange, empty space surrounded by floating screens, phones, tablets, computers, TVs, even VR headsets. These weren't just devices, they were alive with a dark, pulsing energy. As I looked closer, I saw faces on those screens, millions of them. Their eyes were hollow, empty, as if the life had been drained out of them. The sight sent chills down my spine. "This is the battlefield," Jesus said, his voice filled with both sorrow and urgency. "The enemy has chosen this as his weapon against your generation." His words confused me. I had never thought of technology as anything more than entertainment or a tool to stay connected. "How can screens be a weapon?" I asked. Jesus turned to me, and the sadness in his eyes cut through me like a knife. "It started as a tool," he said, "but the enemy has twisted it. These screens are no longer just devices. They have become chains." I looked again and saw chains extending from the screens, binding people by their wrists, their necks, even their hearts. Each chain bore a word: comparison, anxiety, lust, distraction, pride, envy. The words burned into my mind as I realized their meaning. These weren't just words. They were the traps we willingly walked into every day. "They don't even realize they're chained," I whispered. "That's the enemy's greatest trick," Jesus replied, "to enslave them without their knowledge." As I stood there, horrified, the screens began to glow red. Flames licked at the edges, and a symbol began to appear, etched into the devices and onto people's foreheads and hands. "What is that?" I asked, trembling. Jesus' face turned grave. "It is not yet the mark of the beast," he said, "but it is conditioning them to accept it. The enemy is preparing their hearts to worship him instead of me. They are being trained to value convenience, approval, and instant gratification above all else. When the time comes, they will accept the mark without question." I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with memories of how much time I had wasted on my phone, how many times I had felt worthless because of what I saw online. I thought about the fights I'd had with my parents when they told me to put my phone down. I always thought they didn't understand, but now I saw they were right. The scene shifted again, and we were standing in what looked like a battlefield. But this wasn't a war fought with weapons. It was a war fought with families, parents, grandparents, children and teens, all divided. The older generations yelled at the younger ones, accusing them of being lazy, selfish, and addicted. The younger ones yelled back, blaming their parents for not understanding or for creating the very problems they now faced. And in the shadows, the enemy stood, laughing. "They are supposed to be united," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "But the enemy has turned them against each other. The older generations must wake up and fight for their children, not against them." "But how?" I asked. "What can they do?" "They must pray," Jesus replied. "They must teach my word. They must set an example by putting me above all else, even their own distractions." As I looked around, I saw older people glued to their screens too, scrolling through news or playing games while their children wandered into the darkness. The chains didn't just bind the young, they wrapped around the old as well. The battlefield faded, and I found myself standing in a church. At first glance, it looked like a normal service. The sanctuary was filled with people, the pastor was preaching passionately, and the worship team was playing songs of praise. But something was wrong. I noticed that most people weren't paying attention. Some were scrolling through their phones during worship. Others were taking selfies during the sermon. The glow of screens filled the room, drowning out the presence of God. Jesus stood beside me, his face a mixture of anger and sadness. "This is my house," he said, his voice trembling, "but it has become a marketplace for distractions. My people no longer seek me with their whole hearts. They seek entertainment, validation, and convenience." I watched as people shuffled in and out of the sanctuary, more interested in capturing a moment for social media than experiencing the presence of God. My heart broke. This wasn't just about technology, it was about priorities. It was about a generation that had replaced the Creator with the creation. "Why don't they see it?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "Why don't they realize what they're doing?" Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with compassion. "Because the enemy has blinded them," he said. "He uses these distractions to pull their hearts away from me. They are so consumed by the temporary that they forget the eternal." As he spoke, the church began to change. The walls crumbled, the roof disappeared, and I was left standing in a wasteland. It wasn't just a physical wasteland, but a spiritual one. Families were scattered, children wandered aimlessly, and the glow of screens lit up the darkness like a false light. "This is what happens when my people forget me," Jesus said. "When they value the world more than my word, they lose their way. But it doesn't have to be this way." "What can I do?" I asked, desperate for answers. "How can I help?" Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, and I felt a peace unlike anything I'd ever known. "You are my messenger," he said. "You have seen what others have not. Warn them. Tell them that the time is short. Call them back to me." "But they won't listen," I said, my voice shaking. "They'll think I'm crazy." "They rejected me too," Jesus said gently. "But some will hear, and their eyes will be opened. Speak boldly, for the truth has power." The scene shifted once more. I was standing in a room filled with families, parents, grandparents, children, and teens. This time, they weren't arguing. They were praying together, reading the Bible, and worshiping God as one. The glow of screens was replaced by the light of Christ, and the chains that had once bound them were broken. "This is what I desire," Jesus said, his voice filled with hope. "A generation united in faith, walking in my truth. But it begins with you. Will you carry this message?" I nodded, the weight of his words pressing on my heart. "Yes," I said, "I will." In an instant, I was back in my living room. My phone was still in my hand, but it felt different now, cold, heavy, and sinister. I threw it across the room and fell to my knees, crying out to God. I prayed for my friends, my family, and my generation. I prayed for the courage to share what I had seen and the strength to stand against the distractions that had consumed so many. If you're listening to this, I believe it's because Jesus wants you to hear this warning. This isn't just about kids and their phones, it's about all of us. The enemy is using technology to distract, divide, and destroy. He is conditioning us to accept what's coming, and if we don't wake up, it will be too late. Parents, grandparents, and mentors, you have a role to play. Pray for your children and grandchildren. Talk to them about these things. Set an example by putting down your own devices and seeking God first. Show them what it means to walk in faith and truth. And to my generation, don't let the enemy steal your soul through a screen. Seek Jesus. Read his word. Find your worth in him, not in likes, comments, or followers. The time is short, and the choice is yours. I've shared this message not to scare you, but to prepare you. Jesus is calling us back to him, and he's giving us the chance to turn away from the distractions of this world. Will you listen? Will you act? The decision is yours, but remember, eternity hangs in the balance.